Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. The blackest hearted, blackest minded, blackest man on social media signing black and shining again, asking you to hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. So here's this message. In light of what's happened with the Black Lives Matter organization coming out and, literally coming out, literally and figuratively coming out of the closet to promote specifically an alphabet agenda, using the momentum of the black agenda, or rather using the momentum of the black cause against police brutality, I must say that I was not surprised. We now understand the reason that Darren Seals was murdered. What I'm telling you is this. There was no coincidence that at the same time that the Black Lives Matter organization is now changing the sentence Black Lives Matter to have the word matter reflected in a rainbow of colors, and to have a portrait of George Floyd. As I understand it, a portrait of George Floyd was removed and replaced with a rainbow. And it's not a coincidence that at the same time this is happening, I go on Facebook under my real name, and guess what I see? Two people who don't know each other on the same day telling the black masses on Facebook that if they really care about black lives, then they will put black trans lives at the forefront. In so many words, different wordings, of course, but these two didn't know each other. I know because I know both of them. Now, this is the same organization, Black Lives Matter, that was with the black community in telling the white conservative Republicans and even the black sellouts, telling them that they're not allowed to use black on black crime to deflect from the Black Lives Matter protest and movement for one reason. See, this is against police brutality because when vigilantes like George Zimmerman, and especially when uniformed badge-wearing officers murder us, they can get away with it. Amber Geiger was a fluke because she walked into somebody else's apartment. Had that not been the case, I think she would, and she was about to get away with it herself. Muhammad Nur could not do that. Derek Stafford could not do that. Norris Greenhouse Jr. could not do that, but he was let out because his convictions were for nonviolent offenses. However, the point I'm making is that black officers cannot do the same thing under the same circumstances, being afraid for their lives and get away with shooting white folks. But we know white officers can shoot black folks, and it's recently that they've begun to face some convictions and some sentences for it. But we have said we can talk about Black Lives Matter ourselves, but you don't get to come in and then tell us to use that as a deflection, or to get to come in and tell us to consider that as a reason that we should drop the Black Lives Matter sentence and slogan. And yet the organization has now come and they have said that you get to make an exception to that rule as long as the exception is for someone that is trans or not into their own gender. Not into the opposite gender. As long as they're into their own gender and they identify themselves with the opposite gender, then yes, you can go ahead and use that one to latch on to us. That doesn't work because, see, these same black, trans, and queer lives that are being brought to our attention were not taken by police officers. That's the difference. So what I'm saying is that the sentence and the apparent meaning of it is still a good slogan, but the organization is a bunch of damn hypocrites. Now I know why Darren Seals was killed. He spoke against them before he passed away. He said what they were there for and what they were not there for. He said that a long time ago. Years ago, maybe 5 or 4 years ago. I forgot exactly when he passed away, but it was before that point that he said it. That was after Mike Brown was murdered. I remember that. So we're dealing with is a scenario in which sisters will say, you don't get to come and tell us these deflection points, but we get to turn around. And as long as something will dismiss and put to the back the heterosexual, cisgender, heteronormative black male, you can come along and do it. That's fine. Put them at the back. We'll use their bodies and their cadavers after their murders for momentum. But then when we got the momentum, we're going to flip it. And that's exactly what they've done. And the funny thing is, most people in that alphabet community don't have the same agenda as the cabal behind the cabal, because the gay agenda is not something that most gay people have. They want to live their lives working, paying bills, and of course, when it comes to getting busy, they want to bump up uglies with people of their own gender. I'm not allowed to agree with that as a Muslim. I'm simply not. And yes, in a Sharia jurisdiction, that is a capital crime. Hard to prove, but if you prove it, it's a capital offense. But in the States, it's not a capital offense. In Canada, it's not. In most countries now, it's not a capital offense. So what they want to do, the things that they want to do don't infringe upon the rights of other people, to their credit. But there is a cabal behind the cabal. Those probably are not even into their own gender. Yet and still they have an agenda, a gay agenda, that most gays don't have. And we know what that is. That gay agenda is anti-black. That being said, the fact that we have a lot of our sisters, and it is going to come down to this: are you going to support a gay promotion agenda, or are you going to support a black agenda? It is a dichotomy. Supporting a black agenda is not necessarily anti-gay, but supporting a gay agenda is anti-black. And we have a lot of our sisters willing to jump on the gay agenda at the expense of the black agenda. So a lot of Western black women in the US, Canada, the UK, probably Australia too, have pretty much sold us out, whether they know it or not. And to be fair, I know that they feel like a lot of us men have sold them out, because Oluwatoyin Salau had no protection, and that's true. But Oluwatoyin Salau was independent. Now, she was fighting homelessness. She could have used a lot of help, and she was out there marching and trying to help others. But let's be honest, the way she lived was independent. And I'm not going to sit up here and listen anymore to people who say that we black men are not protecting. Because the fact is that when we can protect, we oftentimes do. I'm one of those who will say, well, what's in it for me to protect you if I'm not related to you and you ain't my wife? Yet and still, when it comes down to it, I offer defense. But I do it personally, volunteering to do it. I don't turn around and tell other black men it's your job to protect someone that you don't know, you ain't related to her, you ain't married to her, you don't know her from a can of paint, and ain't nothing in it for you. And you got other women that you have to protect, that you are bound to protect, because you're related to them or married to them. See, I'm not the one that tells them they have to do it. I've just been willing to do it myself. But the fact still stands. If you strong and independent, don't need no man, then how do you expect a man to be there at a time when you are being targeted specifically because some creep saw that you had no man? In other words, if you had one, the creep would have never paid attention to you, because he's looking for someone by herself. That's why. That's how she got targeted. It was unfortunate. I'm not blaming her for it. And I do blame the suspect, whether he is in fact the black man they've arrested or if he's somebody else that got away with it. I blame the actual perpetrator, I should say. Same thing happened on the Gulf Coast last year. There's an African American History Museum, not only in New Orleans, but in a smaller city called Baton Rouge. I think that's the state capital. There is an African American History Museum, and it was founded by a lady named Sadie Roberts. Sadie Roberts Jones, I think is her name. I may have the second last name incorrect. She has two last names hyphenated, but the point is that she was found dead in the back of a car, and it is believed that one of her tenants did it because he was behind in the rent. But when they booked him for it, he said, look, I do owe this money. And she knows it, but she said, I can stay as long as I pay her something. So he pretty much said he had no motive to murder her. Now, DNA evidence has said that there's been DNA evidence on her body, but then he also said that DNA evidence was taken from him while he was in custody, because he was already in custody for something else when they decided that he was the suspect. He said they came without his consent and took saliva and hair samples. So I don't know. I don't really know if he did or not, or if he did it or didn't do it. Cops have figured out. The point I'm making is that uh, at the end of the day, it is true that we do have some women that get, um, we do have some of our ladies that are champions, and they wind up unprotected and victims. That is true. But this is not because we black men hate black women and we're out here looking to hurt them, especially the ones that love us the most. That narrative is a goddamn lie. And black men, I'm going to need you to start fighting back, not just on YouTube, but also on Facebook and Twitter. You're going to need to start doing this. Because right now, what's happening is that we're already at a point where there's not going to be a distinct African American community for another 2 generations. It's just not going to work. My generation, my age group, are probably going to be the last ones to, in large numbers, marry each other. And I know that this is going to stop. I know that this is about to come to an end, because when I attempted to explain why it was to a particular social media group centered around black folks, why it was that black men are not making approaches to African American women anymore, I explained the social and the legal risks. You have to make the right approach, and we don't know what it is till we know her. But you got it. So you just have to just so happen to make the right approach in her eyes. You have to impress her all the way to the altar, which is where she ultimately wants to be anyway, only to have her come back to you years later and ask you for the divorce. Then the better a breadwinner and provider you were, and the longer you were that good breadwinner and provider, the more likely you are to have to pay alimony. After you've lost all husband's rights, you still got all husband's expenses. And then your kids go to her and you got to pay child support. So it's not worth it. I explained this. I simply said to them, things have changed and it's a different paradigm for men. And and a lot of men now were saying, wait a minute, this is too much in exchange for too little. And that's what you're seeing. And of course, the first thing that happened is exactly what Edward Anderson said would happen. Brothers came in and responded to me by saying, oh, you just didn't get none growing up, huh? Why don't you look at yourself and why they rejected you? This wasn't about me. I was just in a group and I saw that this issue came up. I'm used to seeing it on YouTube, but I didn't expect it to come up in this black social media group. And since it came up, I said, oh, well, since you all are surprised by what's going on, I'll just explain it and give it context. And I didn't promote or demote any particular view because that wasn't the place for it. Yet and still, by me explaining what was happening and specifying, I'm not happy about this, I'm explaining, 3 men came in with the absolute worst assumptions. Niggas. This is the mindset. So, but these guys are already married. What they don't know, that I do know, is that their sons are aware of this at a young age. And so most of their sons, because my son told me about this, most of their sons are saying, I am not going to go that damn route. No marriage, no kids, maybe even no dating. Now you have a generation at this point of young guys saying this, and their parents don't know this because this generation is still living under their parents' roof, or they're going to college on their parents' dime. Are you effing kidding me? So by me explaining this and telling them that this has already hit their youth, their kids, they were upset with me. Now factor this in right quick. Edward Anderson said that this is a low-level vibration way to deal with the conversation. These guys all came from some top HBCUs, because that's what this group is centered around. Now, if this is the intellectual level of men that consistently assume that if you see it for what it is, you're just a bitter failure with women, then what do you think the rest of the bottom line point I'm making is that their sons are smarter and have access to more information. So what I'm saying is that their sons, most of them are not going to start black families. And with a lot of us deciding that we're going to do away with the one-drop rule, which could conceivably serve to excommunicate me from our ranks, our numbers are going to shrink genetically and legally. Now let's take, these are the sons of my generation. If most of them ain't gonna start no black families, what about the grandkids of my generation? Those who are black ain't gonna start black families. That's it. We're done. We're toast for. The final nail is in the coffin. And we cannot go back and reconcile because it's not up to the men. See, we men are being blamed for doing two things that are mutually exclusive. When I hear sisters talk in the West, the feminists, I mean, they're saying two things. One, all of us are with other women and treating them well and spoiling them just because they're not sisters. And then all of us are taking advantage of sisters and treating them badly and even murdering and raping them after eating all their food and molesting their kids and living off of them and all this stuff. Right? Like this is all of us, and we're all in both places at the exact same time, which is impossible. I know I can't be in two places at the exact same time. So I want you to stop and think about this narrative. Brothers, we can't reconcile because it's not up to us. It never was. This is bad for both the good women and the good men, but the fact is, it's over for us. It's done. Because this narrative is going out and it is spreading. And the thing I'm going to point out is that the reason why it will be the African American community that is going to vanish along with the Black Canadian and Black British community faster than other Black communities in other parts of the Americas, like Latin America and the English-speaking Caribbean, is going to be because it was specifically in these first world nations that sisters were on board with promoting the alphabet agenda and against Black male heterosexual masculinity. That's what it is. That's why. In no other Black nation do you find that a bunch of sisters will say, well, I'm going to go to the gay bar so I don't get hit on. And then they get hit on by women and decide they want to experiment. You're not going to find that. In America, Canada, and the UK, you will find that. So if a 16-year-old guy is hetero and he would rather get married at a young age than to fornicate, the same sisters that'll tell him you're too young, you don't know what you're doing, you need to just go ahead and suffer and burn until you get some money together. In other words, until you get rich. Will turn around and tell him, if he comes back and says, well, I'm going to experiment with other dudes, oh my, that's great for you. They'll celebrate him, the same ones. And they don't even realize that they would do this. So they will promote the right of children to be into the same gender, even if they weren't naturally so. But they are the ones that are against young people who don't have a lot of money, being especially young guys who are not rich, being heterosexual and practicing heterosexuality, even in the context of a marriage, because he's not rich. This is what we're dealing with, this kind of hypocrisy. And we're dealing with this from the masses, from the majority. And the good women are there, but they got to suffer in silence, lest they be whiteballed by Black women. And they will be. Because believe you me, you ask a sister that's a hairdresser, if her views are conservative, but she voices them in front of her clients, they'll go get another hairdresser. So you know the good ones have to suffer. This is not a case in which our community is going to be sustainable, and we don't even have another generation with the same numbers, especially doing away with the one-drop rule. So this is it. The nail's in the coffin. It's just that we're still alive, and it's going to take time for us to suffocate. But the nail's in the coffin. And we don't have any allies that are going to be willing to open this coffin up for us before we have suffocated. The only way that anybody's going to come and open it up is after we've definitely had enough time to die, just to make sure we're dead. Just to make sure nobody else came to rescue us. That's it. We're being buried alive, and that means you're going to die anyway. That's what we're facing as a community. I wish I didn't have to be so pessimistic, but the fact is that pessimism has been the one formula by which I've been able to accurately predict the future for us. We're just not going to make it. Sabona Baba. We ain't going to make it. I'm sorry, but our community's gone. It's not just in America either, but in the UK and Canada as well, probably Australia. Pretty much most of the first world nations. It's gone. It's done. So, gentlemen, brothers, I want you to understand this. When our community when it begins to dwindle, the same sisters that we could not work with to keep the community going with, The same sisters with whom we could not work to keep the community going are going to be the ones that are going to write down in the history books, these niggas sold us out and they ran after Becky and they were murdering and raping us and treating us completely differently. Let me tell you why they're able to think this way. This goes back to our fault. What is our fault, gentlemen, is not going to be what they say, but what will be our fault is that we made it too damn easy, sexually, romantically, and maritally. How so? Like I said, we made it too easy sexually. We already know how that goes. We'll say that we're not, giving our hearts up that easily, but we've made it by extension. We've made it too easy romantically as well. And then when it comes to marriage, well, let's be honest. If they want to be at the altar one day, then why are we approaching them from the beginning and then impressing them all the way to the altar? And that's where they want to be in the first doggone place. What they do is they look and they say, well, because men want sex, we're going to make them work for it, despite the fact that they want it too. You see? We don't look and say, well, they want marriage, so let's make them work for it. We're not really doing that. Instead, what we're doing is we're working for the sex and then working for the marriage. And in any case, we're doing the work, and then when they've got the marriage and they've got the bag, they're willing to come to us with the papers, the divorce papers. We've made it too easy. Now, because we made it too easy sexually, what that has done is that has created a scenario wherein the average one of us, men, will have 3 sexual partners over our lifetime. The average woman is going to have in the double digits, some triple digits. That's what we've done, high double digits, nearing the triple digits. And a few men are the ones with the extra high body counts, and those are the few men with whom most of these women have gotten their double digits and sometimes triple digits. So in other words, these same women that are so difficult for many of us and we would never get to bag them, they got high body counts. If they're that difficult, you think they were virgins and you can't find one. You get past 25, you ain't got no kids, but you can't find one that ain't got no kids. You just can't. But you more than likely ain't got none. So I'll stop and think about that for a second. Well, because we made it so easy, they were able to then play this game wherein they could be mutually exclusive they could do things that are mutually exclusive to each other because we gave them the room to do it. They were no longer mutually exclusive, right? That's why they believe that you can be, all of you can be over here with Becky and anybody else that's not black and treating them like queens and giving them all your money and then turning around and being with sisters and raping, murdering, abusing, and living off of them and even doing God knows what with their kids and everything else. They believe that you can do this and be in 2 places and do these 2 things at the exact same time within 15 minutes of each other because we've given them the room to do it. So to a certain extent, it is our fault. That part is our fault that the community is not going to continue. We gave him nothing to work for. We made it too easy. Even if it was only sexually, we made it too easy. We're going to pay for that. But we are paying for that now. We're paying for that before the community vanishes and dissolves. We're paying the price for that. So by the time we do die out and go extinct, black men will have paid the price for their sins. That's the difference. They're going to turn around and say that you played a role you did not play in the community vanishing. So when there are very few of us alive, like the final Tasmanians that are alive, they're going to write down that it was us. And it's not. They're going to write down that we ran and abandoned them and betrayed them, when in fact the real thing we did is not something that we could have known was going to lead to the dissolution and vanishing of our community and our people, being too sexually easy. That's the real truth of the matter. You're not going to have a choice. Understand this. Our sons do not have the choice. Our sons don't have the option, in many cases, of starting stable black families that are also sustainable. They don't have the option of starting a family with a white woman in the West, from the West, that is sustainable. She'll leave him too, and will only insist on that divorce later on. That's also the truth of the matter. So black men do not have the option of starting stable Western families, 2 Western parents. That's not an option for brothers or white guys for that matter. So let alone Western sisters. It just can't happen. It's not your fault, bro. Don't let anybody tell you that it was. At this point, we're not talking about how we're going to keep things going. We can't. It's too late. It's just too late. Feminism went too far, won too many victories. And it was not even black men, but it was specifically white men who made these laws the way that they are. White legislators centuries ago that made these laws for a different time and a different place. But our community will probably be the first to vanish. And I want you to understand that BGS Ibmore was on to something. They don't mind mixing anymore while we're the minority, because we would be the ones absorbed into them. They would not be absorbed into us, so they don't mind it to a certain extent. Now, granted, of course, it's going to be their bottom of the barrel that makes its way to us, because that's how it works. But keep in mind that in the end, keep in mind that in the end, they're no longer worried about us overrunning them, genetically speaking. So they're not going to oppose the mixing as much. Some don't like it, but the cabal behind the cabal is no longer going to oppose it, because they already know they probably got some of our blood in them anyway. But they still, they've learned since then that 1 in 10% does not make them unrecognizable as who they identify with. They've learned that already. They realize that 25%, yeah, you might be able to see that, but they also realize that 10%, no, you can't tell necessarily. I might be able to, but they can't. So that's what's going on here. That's what we're dealing with. At the end of the day, that's it. So that being said, you would think, well, why is it that they would promote an alphabet agenda if what they want is the mixing? Well, it's simple. What they don't want is for exactly what is now not an option anyway. What they don't want is no longer an option. We can't start stable African-American families or Black Canadian families or Black British families and keep them going. It's not sustainable. It can barely happen at all to begin with, let alone be sustained. It ain't gonna happen. I mean, they can barely do that with themselves. But they don't want us to be able to do that. So what they want is for us to have 2 options, period. And they've got the sisters to agree that we're only going to get 2 options, period. Maybe if you're one of the few guys that they just all want to bone pre-selected, then you could be the F boy. But that's not a stable situation in which to bring in your babies. That's one thing. Secondly, most of us are going to fall into 1 or 2 categories. Anybody but a sister, because the sister ain't going to treat you the same way she's going to treat that F boy. And that's insulting as hell to you, and you can't sit there and tolerate that. So you accept to be, by yourself, which a lot of guys are saying, okay, fine. Or you get into your own gender, and then they will support you. Sisters will support you. Or, like I said, anybody but a sister. And that leads me to my next point. I now have begun to understand why it is that many of us decide to so-called sell out politically. I get it. I don't agree with it, but I know what the motivation is. We drove them to it. Now, as much as I might hate them for the political platforms that they take on, I have to be honest, we drove them to it. If you think about it, when they don't fit the negative stereotypes that the majority has about us, we are the ones who drive them out. And granted, I don't like it when somebody comes up to me and he's one of us, but he talks exactly like a stereotypical white conservative. I don't like talks like a senator's son or something. Yeah, bro. I don't like that stuff. I really don't. Not with me. Now, if they're doing that to a white guy in a code switch, fine. But as much as I hate it, that does not necessarily mean that I should go and disrespect him. If I don't like it, I could just keep a distance. That's all. I don't have to disrespect him, especially if he didn't do anything that was against our people from the very beginning. But we turn around and we're the ones who act like this. This is us. This is our fault to a certain extent. Because when we don't like somebody that's one of us, we don't necessarily keep a distance. We disrespect them from a young age. By the time we learn to just leave somebody the hell alone, we're in our 20s. By then, the damage is done. And it doesn't even take necessarily something like that. By not fitting negative stereotypes, we select people to ostracize them. Not even to ostracize, but to disrespect. So because he ain't a shooter, we go disrespect him while we're young. This dude realizes his people are trash. He gets older. He's around people that ain't us. We've grown up, but the damage is done because we didn't grow up fast enough. So what I'm saying is that we tend to stay in that teenage mindset a bit too long. We black folks cannot afford a teenage phase. That's the first thing we got to understand. We cannot afford it to begin with. But we tend to stay in it for entirely too long and do too much damage to each other while we're in it. So the one that's able to spell and punctuate correctly when he writes gets ostracized by the rest of us until test day. And so then what happens? Now for the girl, she's allowed to be that smart. That's okay. But her problem is that she ain't twerking on camera. So she gets ostracized. And this becomes her experience with her people. And a lot of this starts in the teenage years. And some of us will say, well, they need to get over what happened in their teens. No, shuck that fit. We need to raise our kids to be better teenagers. That's the first thing. We can be culturally distinct, but we do not have to fit negative stereotypes. And we should not have to in order to be able to socialize with our own kind. We didn't fix that problem. This is another reason the community is not sustainable. It's not going to happen. So now the only thing is, black men, what are you going to do to make sure that history does not remember you as being the one that ruined the community? That's all the discussion's about at this point. I wish that I had better things to say, but no, this is the end of the road for us. At this point, we're just waiting to die or waiting to be dissolved or whatever the case is. We're waiting to not be the same anymore. I would love it if one day this recording is no longer true. But I can't see that happening. In the meantime, hopefully it'll help, but I can't see that either. Until then, black heterosexual male power specifically because they don't like it.